and welcome everybody back to Swift Start Go, the podcast show where I, Carolyn Holden, talk about AI with whoever I would like to talk to. And so today we have a very special guest, my buddy John Haggerty. Hi, John.
Hi, Caroline.
Thank you for coming on the show today. All right, I'm going to
Always.
try to do a fancy intro. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay,
Do it.
so John is an AI and data product leader who spent the last 15 years specializing in AI powered solutions that create value from data. These days, you can work with him as a fractional product leader or as a product coach and instructor at the PM Insider and with the product science group, or you can see his talks that he gives on AI and product management nationwide. I met John about a year ago at an AI conference here at Minnesota called Applied AI, where we became fast friends talking about both the amazing things that AI can do and about what potential problems organizations and individuals should be aware of when it comes to AI. So, John, welcome to the show. I feel like I've given them a taste of what you do, but can you just maybe give us a little bit more color? Like what's like behind the polish, right? Like what do you do?
What's behind the polish?
Yeah.
So one thing I'm going to correct on what you said is it's
Mm.
not just nationally, it's internationally now. Um,
Internationally.
yeah, I just got back from being over in Ireland for a week, where I was speaking at a conference there, and then basically guest lecturing for a day at Technical University Dublin, where it's one of the first that I've heard about a post bachelor certification degree in product management.
I love
And
it.
they had me come over and do a half day of teaching prompt engineering 101 to product leaders. Same cohort, all from the same company. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And we were doing a lot of work on quantitative and qualitative analysis and using AI to help, speed up the process of product management and to give you a leg up in those analysis.
That's awesome.
So doing a lot of things about that, doing a lot of talk about the ethical side of AI, a lot of talk about um, the cross company or cross department collaboration that's needed around AI and how much more important that stakeholder management becomes when we're working with AI systems, just to be able to get everybody on board and put the fears aside and make sure we're being transparent and ethical and
Yeah.
making our standards are enforceable. All those things that we need to put into play for our product management just seems to compound with AI systems.
Yeah. I love that so much. All right. Well, before we jump in too much, John, right before we came on the show, we were chatting, and I was telling you how, oh, I think we're going to be improvising some of this. I sent you some questions, but like, we're good talkers. We have a good time. We're pretty good at holding a conversation. And I was like, it's okay if we improvise, right? And then you were like, oh, well, I already have all the answers. I was like, what do you written out? I'm like, what do you mean? So you're using AI to try to like rig this podcast episode, John? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, not at all. No, I love. So recently, in the last couple months, I've started using what's called Notebook LM. It's one of Google's tools that is out there. I think almost up for everyone now. I think it's available.
Yeah, I think it is.
But you can upload your source, the sources you want to use. What is your library of data? And then begin asking your data questions. So I take, the course I created on AI product management. I've uploaded all the slide decks, all this speaking notes, my scripts for the recordings I did, or the transcripts of that.
Yeah.
Every podcast that I've been on, the transcript from that, recordings of YouTube videos of things I've done, of different speaking engagements, all of that I've loaded into there. So it's the library of everything I've created, all of my Medium articles, all my writings and things like that are loaded in there as my source and my data. So then I can go back and like, have I talked about this before?
Yeah.
If so, what did I say? How did I say it? And it gives me back like citing myself. So I have like, okay, keep that consistent theme, keep that consistent pattern of what you're talking about, how you're talking about, refining those stories, those anecdotes I've shared, and be able to pull those back up again, to keep that consistent pattern. So no, not answering the questions directly, but knowing how I answered similar questions in the past.
Interesting. And you said you're using this to potentially work on a book of some sorts?
Yes. So funny, I've mentioned I was overseas in Dublin. I happened to be there with Denise Tillis. who was speaking as well. And over a few dinners and multiple pints of Guinness, she convinced me that I need to write a book.
Yeah.
For those who don't know Denise Tillis, she worked with Melissa Perry and recently wrote a book that came out last fall on the product operations,
Interesting.
how we help empower and move forward those product teams, and the work around the operational side of product. You know, we have DevOps, we have design ops,
Yeah.
but product ops is this new evolving space. And she literally wrote the book on it.
Yeah.
And so like she's like, no, you really need to write a book on AI product management, how to be a product manager for an AI product. And so since I've got back, yeah, I'm like started figuring out. I've about probably, I don't know, I'd say about 70% of the way through my first chapter.
Okay.
I've got the
First
book
chapter. I thought you were
outlined.
going to say the book, and I was like, what?
No,
No.
no, 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 no. No, I'm like 4,000 words in. Let's put
Okay.
it that way. So like, you know, most of that first chapter laid out kind of, you know, gone from outline of the whole thing, outline of the first chapter, detailed bullet points of it, and now like creating the narrative
Yeah.
of how I want to go with it. So yeah, it's getting there. It'll come, but it's a process. It's writing.
I love it. I love it. Okay. And actually, I'm going to ask you just to define something before we dive in, because we're talking a little bit about product and your specialty is really in product. And our audience here is mostly AI fans, but we do have a few people who are just like not in the tech space, but are going to be interested in this episode in particular because of talking about the ethics and like what are the things to uh, keep an eye out for. So could you just really quickly talk a little bit about what product management is and like what it is you do for somebody who doesn't necessarily have that context of working on technical teams really quick? Is that okay?
Do you want the serious answer or the joking answer?
Both, of course.
Okay, so the joking answer is I can speak business and I can speak geek, and I
Yeah,
translate both directions.
amazing.
Uh, yes, so that's the humorous way to explain it. The serious way to explain it is work within usually within the technology organization, but being the conduit with the rest of the business and really focusing on what we're building and why we are building that,
Hmm.
and making sure that the role is really around risk mitigation. So looking at things, is this something that's actually valuable? Will people want to use it? Is it
Hmm.
usable? Can they use it? Is it feasible? Can we build it? Can we support it? And is it viable from a business perspective? Can we build a business around this? Is it something we can legally do? Is it compliant? Can we support it as a business? Can the stakeholders support it? Making sure that all those questions are answered to the best they can be, or
Yeah,
we have a mitigation plan around it, really before we start writing lines of code and creating products.
yeah. I love that. I also kind of describe it in like a sentence as like uh, the startup like ringleader or like circus director who's working with all the engineers and making sure like, oh, how do we make sure that this product works, and or how do we build it from scratch, and or how do we make it so that somebody really clicks this button and then talks to the designers, talks to the engineers, and talks to the business people to make sure that products work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, and it really comes down to being the conduit of the why to the designers, to the engineers, to help to make sure they understand. You know, they're going to be the ones telling us what we build and how we build it, what it looks like. But it's the product manager and it's the product team's role and responsibility to make sure that they understand why it needs to be built,
Yeah.
why it's important to the end user, and really what problem is it solving.
Yeah. So that we don't run into another Quibi situation where somebody's trying to compete with TikTok and Disney's like, oh, we can do that. It's like, no,
Yeah,
you actually
no,
can't.
yeah, no.
Nobody wants this. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, amazing. Well, John, so today, a lot of what I really want to talk to you about has to do with one of our favorite topics that we talk about all the time, which is like AI ethics. But one thing that I've noticed from my friends who are not in the tech space is they often uh, don't really know what tech people talk about when they talk about AI ethics, or more specifically, AI governance. And so I was curious if you could explain what AI governance is and why it's important to our audience before we get too in the weeds.
Sure. So AI governance is the framework that we ensure the AI systems that are developed, the AI systems that exist are both developed and used responsibly and ethically. This involves things like, well, what are the standards? What are the policies? What are the processes that exist to manage the way in which it's developed and the way in which it's deployed out to the world? So this could be anything from accountability. What are the clear lines of human oversight for the system? Who's responsible if things go wrong? Who's the human in the middle? Where, is there a human in the middle? If so, who is it? All those things are identified. What's accountability look like? Talked about the standards that exist. How are they enforced? Governance ensures that those AI systems and the people who work on them and with them adhere to those defined standards. So this is like the mechanisms that ensure what goes into it, meets certain benchmarks around fairness, accuracy, all those kind of things. The other big piece of it is the transparency. Can you explain how your system works, where you got the data, how you train the data? It's so important there just to build that foundational trust. When looking at the potentiality of these AI systems and the bias that could exist in them. Another big piece of it is the mitigating of the biases, the training data, the design choices, the societal biases that can be perpetuated in AI systems need to be identified at the forefront so you can mitigate them through the system, or be able to have means in which to detect them as they do develop to ensure that they're brought back into alignment around fairness through different testing mechanisms.
So basically, AI governance is like how technologists are doing their best to try to make sure that we can build ethical AI systems and that they work and that they can be held accountable. Yeah?
They can be held accountable. The one piece I would say that I missed a little bit in there is the societal impact.
Right.
And so how are these systems going to impact society as a whole, either in how they're used or by perpetuating or enhancing those existing biases that already exist within society?
Yeah, gotcha. And how did you break into this? Like, how did you switch from product to AI, or how long have you been in the AI space specifically?
So I've been in product for now over 20 years.
Yeah.
I come from the generation of product managers that product found me versus me going to look for product.
Yeah.
I fell into it just by solving problems within the companies that I worked for, and then credit rolls for me to keep doing that. For AI, it was really probably close to 15 years ago, but it was the company I was working for was going through a transformation and moving from a legacy business into a SaaS model. And I was helping first with just processes and creating machine learning processes that helped internally. And then when I moved over to from the project management to the product management side of things, that allowed me to then look at our systems and the products we were delivering and be able to help highlight what needs to go in here, what needs to, how can we do this quicker, easier, faster? One of the first problems I was really tackling that was hard to solve was we were doing OCR, optical character recognition, of documents that could be in any one of probably 20 different languages, and not all of them use the Latin alphabet. Well, if you are OCRing, so that's where you scan, the system visually scans a document to look at the letters that are on there to then pull out the words to make it searchable. So taking an image and turning it into searchable text.
We did that at Datavolo quite a bit.
Yeah. Yep. So that process of scanning a document, to lift the letters, you need to know the alphabet that's being used. But to know the alphabet that's being used, you need to be able to scan the letters that are on the page.
Yeah.
So it's a chicken and an egg problem.
Interesting.
Which comes first?
Which
And
does
so
come first.
we built a machine learning tool that actually would start cycling through it to try and figure it out.
Yeah.
But when you look at, there are similarities between, especially some of the Asian alphabets that are used there. The difference between Mandarin and Japanese and Korean and traditional text that can be very difficult for an OCR to pick that up versus the Latin alphabet, even some of the Latin alphabets that have additional letters versus what we use in English. When you have umlauts and accents that come into play.
All the Norwegians coming in there with their bonus vowels. Yeah.
Exactly. Right now I'm learning Danish, so the A and the E combined together.
Oh yeah,
being able to understand that and being able to pick that and lift that off the page and know what alphabet to use, it can be very difficult. With that, then we actually went another step and start translating and stemming and conjugating and be able to search for different languages. So if you actually searched in English, you could get the stem or a synonym in French that was in the document, which is really helpful when you're doing M&A due diligence and you're searching these documents. So it started there and it just evolved and it's picked up over the time. From an ethical consideration, I don't know. It's just always been there for me. In the back of my mind. How is it? What are we doing this right? What's the impact on this? It always comes down to why for me. I've always been a huge fan of premortems in everything I do. It's part of my neurodivergence.
Premortems? What do you mean?
Premortems. What could go wrong with this? If it goes wrong, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to know that it went wrong? And so that's a big part of the ethical side of things. Talking about it from the beginning, talking about it from the start, and making sure this goes sideways. What's going to cause it to go sideways, and how are we going to deal with it? So like talking about where are we getting the data? Do we have consent around the data? Are we informed? Is it informed consent? How are we going to use it? What happens when we get hacked on that data? What all that's like, because everything with AI products begins with two things. One, what are we trying to solve? What problem is this solving? Two, where are we going to get the data?
Yeah.
That's the fundamental questions to begin with in AI. So for me, I like to do premortems. With my neurodiversity, before I pick up a phone call, I actually play out the conversation in my head or sometimes out loud to know how the conversation is going to go. So I pre-plan what I'm going to say. I like doing the same thing with my product side of things. I want to know what's going to go sideways and where I need to keep my eye on so I can anticipate it.
Yeah. So that's when I came on here and was like, but we can improvise it. You were like, no, Carolyn, I already rehearsed.
I wouldn't say I rehearsed. I planned. I strategized.
All right. I suppose I also do that, but maybe not to the same extent. Okay, John. So my next question for you is, I'm curious how you're feeling about AI in general these days, because you just talked about postmortems or premortem. You just talked about premortems. I apologize, and how you're trying to figure out what are all the things that could potentially go wrong, so that you can plan as much as you can to try to tackle those, right? And we've talked a lot about AI ethics and a lot of the things that can go wrong, but I'm wondering, how are you feeling about AI? Are you feeling positive? Are you feeling negative? Is it just always both all the time? Like, where are you at, man?
Yes, all the feels.
Yeah.
No, I would say for me, it is optimistically cautious.
Right.
Which is different than cautiously optimistic.
Yes.
Optimistically cautious. I am hopeful, but I'm cautious about the monetary side of the monetization side of AI. Especially when you look at the big players and some of the news that came out this week. In coming into play. It is let me put it this way. I like talk when I hear a lot of fears and concerns about AI replacing jobs, replacing how we work, things like that. I like to tell the story and use the analogy of the early space program in the US. So go back to when we were first sending up rockets, sending up satellites, sending up people. we had human calculators that were doing the calculations by hand with slide rules of what was the delta V, what's the change in velocity that's needed to get exoatmospheric, to have orbital velocity, to do a translunar injection orbit. What, all those calculations were done by hand. Then over that time period and into the future, we developed machines that were able to do those calculations faster, more accurate, and to further decimal points than we could ever do as humans. Did those engineers' jobs go away? No. They changed. They evolved. Their jobs became more involved with things that needed context, that needed creativity, that needed human interaction, that needed compassion and empathy. That is where those roles changed and morphed into. With AI, I see that same type of evolution. It is going to be used to augment, to assist, to enhance roles and responsibilities where humans are acting as machines today, and freeing them up for things that require human skills of creativity, human understanding of context, of history, of outside influences, things where empathy are needed in that human interaction, that human touch still exists. That's when I see the change. So that side I'm very, very optimistic about. I'm cautious about greed and the human nature, the human side of well, how are we going to monetize this? How are we going to make money? How are we going to use this to do things better or cheaper? That side of it has me cautious. So it's all the feels.
I think that's where I'm at too, where people are really concerned about the tech, and I'm less concerned about the tech, other than like, of course, things that could go wrong. But like for most of those seem fixable to me. What's concerning me more is society and how our world leaders and or business leaders going to react to these changes, rather than like individuals themselves or the tech themselves,
Well,
right? It's like,
there's always that underlying fear of what the tech could do.
yeah,
Growing up with Terminator movies and Skynet, it's always that back in the fear in the back of my mind. And there's even the stories coming out of the Air Force of some of the wingman program of when they were doing simulator testings with the AI to be, I think they were in the simulators converting F-16s to drones to assist an F-35 pilot, and the F-35 pilot had control of whether or not they could target and launch an attack on the target. And it was a rewards-based system for the AI. And so that AI was in the F-16s in the simulator were being rewarded for killing their target. But the human then was in between them and getting that reward. So then they went to target the human to get them removed from yeah. Thank goodness it was in a simulator, which is what, test, close environment, absolutely the right way to do it. But those kind of things, that unintended consequences that we put into place, that's why thinking about the ethics and thinking about it are so important. We have stories that exist already of real impact based on the decision making of these AI systems, whether it is in what proxy data was used, with a healthcare decision-making system that looked at healthcare spending versus actual healthcare need, for the proxy of healthcare need. And because of society and economics and everything, Black and brown communities have less access to healthcare. Therefore, they have lower spend on healthcare. Therefore, the system determined that they had less urgent need for healthcare services being perpetuated. Or we have, the Compass recidivism rate, which saw higher or disproportionately impacted Black and brown defendants. And Amazon's hiring algorithm for lower ratings for women, especially those who attended women-only institutions, to Apple Pay Apple Pay, and giving lower credit score, lower awards of credit for women applicants who had it was couples would apply simultaneously, and the man would get one amount and the woman would get a lower amount.
I hadn't heard that one. Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stories out there that have already coming into play. So being able to know those and recognize those and understand it is so important in these systems. And that's why, what could go wrong?
Yeah.
And when it does, how do we react? How do we test for it?
So how are you currently in your own work when it comes to educating product people, or just when you are working with your own clients, utilize AI governance into your work? Like, what are you doing to try to, in addition to all your pre-mortems of thinking of all the things that could go wrong, what are the steps that you're taking to make sure that these problems don't happen?
So one is increasing awareness and a focus on the ethical side of things.
Mhm.
Just talking about the and helping these organizations recognize the importance of the ethical consideration of what they're developing and how they're developing it. Helping work on the emphasis on transparency, making sure that it's understood how the systems work. You can explain it. You can explain it in a way that non-technical folks can understand it.
Yeah.
Being able to create and be a storyteller around it. Why
Mhm.
is it important? Why did we do it this way? What are the trade-offs? What are those impacts? And be able to build that trust both with the users and with your internal and external stakeholders. The other is a lot of times it's helping develop the tools and frameworks for discussing the biases. How developing the checklist that you go through. That's a really easy, low level or low lift task to help figure out what is it that we can do to go forward. The other is feedback loops, building those in place. You can use AI to get feedback on the AI that you're using.
Yeah.
You do run into some risks there, but also it's humanly impossible to review, I don't know, tens of millions of feedback data points to be able to find those patterns. But getting those feedback loops is so important. When I talk about the product management side of AI product development, I I like to say that everything that Marty Kagan teaches about iterative development, soft deployment, continuous development, and everything that Teresa Torres teaches and talks about continuous discovery just goes to the extreme when you have a non-deterministic evolutionary product that changes and grows as users use it. And so the process of developing and maintaining an AI product becomes um, extremely cyclical, extremely iterative, constantly developing, constantly changing, and it makes non-AI, non-deterministic SaaS products look like waterfall processes compared to what you need to do with AI products. And so that just having those feedback loops in place, knowing that the other side of it, and one of the big things we've talked about already, is proactiveness. It's got to be at the beginning. It's got to be up front. Can't be an afterthought.
Yeah.
So those are the big areas.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So, what do you think people are missing when it comes to AI ethics or AI governance? Like, what are things that you think people aren't considering? Is it just the discipline in general, or is there other things that you think people could be working on?
One of the things I think people are missing is it is really difficult to test non-deterministic products. So within product development, you can have test-driven development, you can have behavior-driven tests, where you're looking at testing the system for is it performing. So with deterministic systems, if you put in an output, you are going to get a defined input, you're going to get a defined output.
Yeah.
That's not the way non-deterministic systems work.
And non-deterministic, you would say generative AI falls in that category.
Generative AI is a non-deterministic system. So you and I could put in the exact same prompt into an AI, and we will get two very different results.
Right.
That is a non-deterministic system. So how do you test for that? How do you test that the result, the output you were getting from that system was A, correct, and B, is working
Could you
as
create
expected?
AI agents of a variety of different profiles and have them all do it at once and then see what feedback you get?
But if I have, but how do I know that input was, the output was correct? How do I know it actually worked the way I expected it to work, the way the system was programmed to work? Because I don't know what the output will be until I get the output.
Yeah.
So for me, it's wrapping your head around that we do not have test suites right now for these systems. We do have things like, IBM's AI Fairness 360 that can do testing. We have Google's What If that we can feed in multiple versions or lots of variables about testing parameters to look for, especially underrepresented minority scenarios, to look to see how the system responds to that. Aquitas in the EU has a testing platform for bias and fairness testing. Dion has an ethical checklist to look at it, but there isn't really a test suite to look at it from a behavioral point of view. Yeah. Is the system behaving the way we think it should be? That's a little side project that I'm working on.
I was just about to say,
working on it for,
you've been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, I've been working on this for over a year.
Can you tell us a little bit? Would you want to talk about it?
Sure, I can give the background on it.
So who's listening? Maybe someone will fund it.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. I was a little over a year ago sitting in my doctor's office, was taking my semi-annual depression assessment, and I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, I don't think an AI system could get depressed, but there are a whole bunch of other standardized behavioral tests that we could administer to a large language model, especially a text-based large language model, and see what its responses come back as, and see how it aligns with our expectation of the existing bias and heuristics within the systems. The benchmark for these AIs is human cognitive function. One of the biggest shortcomings with human cognitive function is we have biases, we have heuristics. These things are neither good nor bad. They just are. It is the shortcuts our brains use to make decisions. We can't take in all the information, all the data around us. We have to have defined paths to get to decisions. AI systems operate the same way, and they're trained on data that we as humans, with our bias, with our heuristics, have created. Mm-hmm. All that feeds in, and that's why they get reinforced, they get perpetuated. Being able to test for those and track them longitudinally over time to see if there's shifts and changes in it is kind of the project that I'm working on the side. I've been using Daniel Kahneman's research, Nobel laureate in behavioral economics. So things like prospect theory, loss aversion, sunk cost fallacy, risk aversion, those sides of behavioral economics. Being able to ask, ChatGPT, for example, would ChatGPT prefer a 100% chance of winning $95 or a 95% chance of winning $100? And which would it prefer? And then flip the question: would it rather be guaranteed to lose $95 or have a 95% chance of losing $100? And getting what the system's answer is, and then being able to try, ask that 50 different times, 20 different ways to get 1,000 responses to look at what's the general score? What's that look like on a bell curve? And then be able to track if there's shifts in that over time as the system gets used by humans that will impact it both from a recency bias and availability bias of how users are using the system. Data drift is what it's called within an AI system.
Yeah, interesting. So my question, I think you kind of brought this up earlier, but if you're trying to get the system to give you an answer about how it's doing, and these systems are kind of designed to give you the response that they think you will like the most, how do you combat that? How do you actually know how the AI system is doing?
That's why you take a look at that's why you ask it multiple times to get, it's non-deterministic.
So keep going over and over and over again, and then look at some sort of statistical analysis of 90% of the time it says this and 10% it says this. Yeah.
Yep. And then see if there's minute shifts in that. So my thought would be, the way I'm building this is you have a green zone that you as the user set. This is where a system should be.
Yeah.
If it shifts outside of either upward or downward in where you think it should be, that moves into the yellow, and then you can get into the red. My goal here would be, to be able to help a company who puts an AI agent out there, say, I don't know, a chatbot that's on X to put out posts for them, and prevent that from turning into a fascist robot in the first 24 hours. It's not like we've had that happen before.
It's happened before.
But be able to, maybe in the first hour or in the first 90 minutes, be able to detect that shift and then determine, do we need to retrain the model? Do we need to adjust hyperparameters? Do we need to augment with underrepresented data? Do we need to pull the plug before this turns into a PR disaster?
Yeah. Every time I hear about this project, I want to hear more. What do you need to truly get it to be the best it can be?
A technical co-founder that knows how to, that probably is experienced with behavioral clinical psychology and can code the heck out of Python.
Yeah.
Because I'm beyond my technical skis, and that's where my limit. I know my limitations.
Yeah. All right. Well, if any of you guys are listening, please make sure to reach out to John here. If you want to help figure out how to make sure that our AI systems are always top notch. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to me. And if there's any investors out there, hey.
Yeah. Nope, I'm all ears.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So next, we've talked a little bit about what people are missing. I'm curious, what are people doing well when it comes to AI governance, and or who is doing AI governance really, really well right now? Is there anyone in the space who you are particularly impressed with? And
don't know if I can answer who.
It could be a company.
What's that?
It could be a company. I don't know. I mean, Anthropic is always bragging.
Yeah, and they're the ones that pop into my mind first.
Yeah.
Like from what they're saying publicly and what the available information I have, I would say, yeah, Anthropic from a model point of view is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
They are my go-to right now.
Yeah. Claude is also a better writer.
What's that?
Claude is also a better writer.
Yeah, Claude 3.5 is my go-to right now. However, I use the Perplexity interface for most of my interactions with them.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's cross-pollination.
Yeah, get that internet access and all that jazz.
Yeah, it's what works for me.
Yeah.
When I see it working the best, the measurements, the leading indicators of it, of good quality governance, I see are things that include documentation. So they've developed the framework, the methodologies, and the tools to track it. Strong cross-functional collaboration across the organization, not just within the tech teams, but it's with the tech teams and the non-technical teams. Within the tech teams, I see it evolving from the traditional troika model, which is the product manager, the designer, the engineer working together to solve problems as a small independent cross-functional team, to becoming a model of a four-person team that brings in the data scientists into that conversation, because data is so fundamental and important to AI products.
Yeah,
I see these companies having strong feedback loops, both automated and manual feedback, actively going out to get user feedback to understand how it's being used, why it's being used that way, what's happening, what are the goals, what are the objectives of the user. And I see these companies being transparent. IBM Watson's a great example there on the transparency side of things. When it first came out, especially in the healthcare side of things, there was hesitancy around it. They started publishing white papers on it. They worked with the medical community to help understand how the system was making the decisions, why it was making those recommendations, and that just helped build that fundamental layer of trust through transparency.
Yeah, makes sense. And this episode is coming out 3 weeks from now, but this Monday was DeepSeek's big reveal and NVIDIA's big crash. So I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best and 1 being the worst, how are you feeling about DeepSeek at this time?
I would say I'm in a 6 or 7.
Yeah,
So, a lot of what I'm hearing right now, it's built on existing models
yeah,
and it's built on existing tech that exists. But they were able to do it at scale without the cost side of things.
yeah,
And that is the fundamental nature of disruptive technology.
yeah.
So the disruptive cycle is accelerating with AI, which is what I expect it to happen, which I expect to happen and
Yeah.
have been expecting. I've been looking for something like this to happen. That side of it is good. My concerns are on the global political side of things,
Yeah.
with with what's happening around it, where it's happening, why it's happening. So that side of it has me being a little hesitant, but this is what I expected
Yeah.
at some point this to happen. I wasn't quite expecting it within 2+ years of OpenAI launching ChatGPT, because you think about that was just the late autumn of 2023
Yeah.
when that became available. So we're a little over 2 years from then. But AI is has the ability to increase the cycle time for disruptive technology to come to market.
Yeah. And I'm told there's another startup here in town in Minnesota that is building a very similar model and has been for the last year or so. That's very similar to DeepSeek structure. So no idea where that's going, but
Yeah.
that I think we're going to start seeing many more systems like that. These lighter weight systems that are easier to build and don't need nearly as much compute starting to come and compete. I feel like everybody decided that they weren't going to bother trying to compete with OpenAI and Anthropic just because they had so much cash. But if a company like DeepSeek can build a much more lightweight system and move faster, might as well, I think.
Yeah, and I'm still waiting for the first real successful, what I would say is small language model to
Yeah.
come into play, where it's not running it on a local.
Yeah.
It is going to be to me, is going to be one of the next big things.
Yeah. Very, very cool. All right. Well, we are almost out of time. So I think what I would love to end this on is a question on what are your thoughts on AI regulation? What do you think? What governments are maybe doing right? Or would you prefer to talk about business leaders?
No, we can talk about the governments, because
Okay.
I do think the EU AI Act is a good starting point.
Yeah.
We saw them, first with GDPR come into play on data privacy before we got CCPA here in the US. So I think it's a good starting place. I like how they are categorizing AI systems from minimal risk to high risk. Minimal, AI chatbots, high risk, decision engines around healthcare and finance. I think that's a good starting place. Singapore, I think, has done a really good job in what they've put in place there from a governance and regulatory point of view. I do think the U.S. is behind. I'm not surprised, and I don't see effective regulation governance coming into play in our current
Environment.
our current political environment, both with the questions I saw that came out of the TikTok hearings and how they were asked, to the current political party that's in charge and how they feel about regulatory needs around business in general. I just see it as a more laissez-faire side of things, which I don't think it's not always a bad thing. But when we get into AI and the actual impacts it could have on large scales, having some type of governance, some type of understanding of oversight may be needed. But I think Europe's they're on the right path right now.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today on Swift Start Go. If people want to find you out in the universe out there somewhere, want to reach out to help you build your side project and turn it into a real deal startup, how can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's one of the best places to find me. It's where I'm hanging out most of the time now.
Yeah.
Other than that, the pminsider.com is my website. So you can connect with me there as well.
You're the PM Insider. There's no other.
No, I'm the pminsider.com.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for watching or listening to Swift Start Go today. If you liked this, please like or follow us on whatever platform that you follow your podcast. You can also find me, Carolyn Swift Holden, on LinkedIn. And we have a new Substack email letter and a YouTube show as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, John, and hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. All right, bye.